Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about this book by Rhett Dodson called Every Promise of Your Word, the Gospel According to Joshua. If you follow my channel, you'll know that I've been kind of doing a little series in a sense, reviewing a number of the books and resources that I used when I preached through the book of Joshua recently at my church. This is the last book that I want to share with you as I kind of go through those resources. And this book, this is kind of unusual for me because this commentary is really a sort of collection of sermons that Rhett Dodson preached on the book of Joshua at his church. They've been adapted and updated to fit in kind of more of a book form, but that is in essence what you have here. And I'll just, honestly, typically I don't love those kinds of commentaries. Typically I find those less helpful, less substantive. I find myself in the conundrum of either reading those and saying, this is a great sermon, and then I'm struggling to sort of break out of that and preach my own sermon, or I find I didn't really love this, and then what was the value of it? So I don't typically love commentaries that are sort of sermons turned into commentaries, but this is the exception to that rule. I really, really enjoyed Dodson's book and found it to be probably the single most reliably helpful source. So I'll talk a little bit at the end about how it intersects with some of the other books that I have done reviews on recently. But let me tell you a little bit more about what this book is doing and what I liked about it. So this was published by Banner of Truth. It is, I think, the newest book out of the resources that I was leaning on and using. It's still almost 10 years old, came out in 2016, but is just very, very well written. He takes 27 chapters to work through the 24 chapters of the book of Joshua, and that takes, about 370 pages. So this is a significant book. It's a significant series. I think I preached through the book of Joshua slightly faster, maybe. I'd have to go back and check the numbers now, but I was pretty close to his division of the book. I felt like he did a good job of, slowing down where you needed to slow down, but also knowing how to cover some of those sections, especially if you get into the kind of the third part of the book where it's the division of the land. Some of those chapters are just long lists of genealogies and names, and there's wonderful riches there, but you don't need to go kind of verse by verse, line by line. You need to draw in, sort of draw out the major themes and sort of drop into particular significant moments in the book. And so he does a great job of giving the preacher or teacher some help in figuring out, okay, where are those points where I need to slow down? Where are those points where I can sort of speed up or zoom out and kind of give that overview? So I really like just the way he divided the book at the front end, which if you're planning on preaching or teaching through the book, that's a really important thing. But what he does for each chapter then is to walk through a given section. Sometimes that's just a few verses, especially at the beginning. He moves kind of slowly. So chapter 1, which is only 18 verses total, he takes 3 chapters to work through those 18 verses. But then other places, so for example, let me see here, chapter 20, he covers Joshua 13 through Joshua 19 in just one sermon. And then he'll go back and sort of drop into a few significant points. But some of them are more overview, some of them are more in-depth. But he does a good job of kind of walking through that. And what he tries to do in this book is to, give you a kind of good introduction to this passage. So again, it's very sermonic, it's very homiletical in its form. He'll kind of give you the introduction to kind of hook you in. He'll summarize what the section is about, and then he'll walk you through his outline of the text. It's very much exegetically driven. He is very much coming at this as a preacher. So I mentioned in my last review video, Dale Ralph Davis's kind of contemporary classic commentary on Joshua called Joshua No Falling Words. And in that book, I said that Davis kind of wears 2 hats. He wears his kind of scholarly professor hat, but he's also a preacher, so he puts that hat on as well. I would say that applies to Rhett Dodson too, but I would maybe put the emphasis on opposite sides of that scale. So Dale Ralph Davis, I think, was first and foremost a Old Testament professor who also, preaches and has been a pastor of a church. Rhett Dodson is almost kind of the opposite. He's first and foremost a preacher and a pastor, but he also has some good scholarly background. He has a PhD, and he's done work in the book of Joshua with the Septuagint translation of Joshua and the Hebrew text and different things like that. So he's bringing both of those things to bear, but he's leaning more heavily on the preaching side. So I actually found these to be great complements. What I would typically do is read Dale Ralph Davis first to kind of get more of that commentary, scholarly viewpoint on the text. And then I would pick up Dodson as kind of my last resource to sort of check my own work. I would have developed my own sermon outline, but I want to read him because there would always be helpful connections or insights or points. And one of the things that he really is good at and does a great job of making a consistent feature of his messages through the book of Joshua is that it is the gospel according to Joshua. He draws out those redemptive, historical, Christ-centered applications and implications of the text in a way that's really beautiful. So I mentioned in a previous review video Francis Schaeffer's book, Joshua and the Flow of Biblical History. Schaeffer was also very strong on that. If there was a downside, it was just that his was less commentary-like, and his approach to the book was very different than what Dodson took and what I took. So there wasn't always a Schaeffer chapter to map onto the work that I was doing. So when the paths crossed, it was great and very useful. Schaeffer was, but they didn't always cross. So and then Dale Ralph Davis will occasionally have those more redemptive historical kind of insights or comments, but that's not primarily how he's thinking. He's thinking like an Old Testament guy, first and foremost. I found Dodson to be that helpful kind of in-between. He's got the Old Testament perspective, but he's coming at it as a preacher, and he's very sensitive to and helpful to help you become sensitive to Christ in the book of Joshua, Jesus in the book of Joshua, and all of those wonderful connections. And again, he's just developing more the illustrations, the applications, the Christ-centered connections. So I would sometimes find, sort of exegetical comments or insights in Dodson that I hadn't seen elsewhere, but typically those things I could find other places as well. What I found so helpful about this book is that it would take those insights and tie them together and put it in a sermon form, a homiletical form that was really, really useful. So, my brain kind of thinks in terms of outline, so I rarely, found that his outline was how I would come at it. I preach differently, of course, which I think is important. You don't want to be copying someone else, but I could always find things in his sermons to help me in my sermon, things that I could draw out. So I think my congregation kind of came to expect that if they were hearing a sermon from me, at some point I'm going to be probably quoting from Rhett Dodson, and then maybe Schaeffer, maybe Dale Ralph Davis. So just as I kind of bring this little mini-series to a close, if I was talking to someone who wanted to preach through the book of Joshua, I did a review on Peter Master's book on the book of Joshua. I did not really find that helpful. You can watch the whole review if you want, but that's not a book I would really recommend to folks. But I would say three that were very useful: Francis Schaeffer's Joshua and the Flow of Biblical History, very helpful at kind of apologetic concerns, redemptive historical, Christ-centered applications and connections. Dale Ralph Davis is just a really solid kind of teaching, commentary, guide through the book of Joshua. And then Rhett Dodson's Every Promise of Your Word, really good at just tying all that together, putting it in a good sermon form. Very devotional, very encouraging. So if you're a preacher who's going to work through the book of Joshua, I would definitely get this. It'll be a great resource for you. It could also just be great reading for a Christian. If you want to just have someone sort of walk you through the book of Joshua, a sort of a sermon series, in book form, but so encouraging. And there really is so much in the book of Joshua. And I would just say, kind of bringing this little, again, set of reviews to a close, that really is where the strength and the power is. It's not in Schaeffer or Davis or Dodson or any other commentator or any other preacher like myself. The book of Joshua itself is just a rich and wonderful book. And if you have some of those helps and guides along the way, it will really help to grow your faith and the faithfulness of God. So I would encourage anyone, if you haven't read the book of Joshua or are looking for something for your next kind of Bible study, that would be a great resource. And if you are still growing in your Bible study abilities or have not read through the Bible before, I would definitely use some of these resources. They will help you to kind of put things in context. And if you're looking for just one resource, this would probably be the one I would recommend. Every Promise of Your Word The Gospel According to Joshua by Rhett, Dodson.